So I understand around this time you also travelled to South America?
Yes, it was later in the year, end of 1978, and once again another thematic issue of economic geology. These by now were coming my geo-tour itineraries, and so I found that I was just learning so much by looking at the rocks and visiting the mines. So this particular issue dealt with silver deposits in Peru. It had some of the porphyries in Chile, and it also had some of the deposits in Brazil. So I looked at this and figured out an itinerary, and then I commenced by writing a letter to the various companies that owned the mines, and the first one I wrote to was Buenaventura. And so it was only a matter of about 2 or 3 weeks, and I received a wonderful response from the president of Buenaventura,
Don Alberto.
Don Alberto Benavides. And I was absolutely thrilled with this. Similarly, I was able to set up the Brazilian leg through, once again, John Koenig, because Anglo at the time were operating Jacobina and Maravello. And so that was all taken care of. I had a gap with the Chilean porphyries, but I thought, well, if I get myself there, I'll wing it and see what happens. So a couple of months later, I had the time and meagre finance I needed to get there. So I got myself to Lima. I found Buenaventura's office early in the morning, and the secretary said, wait a minute, we'll see if Mr. Benavides is in, and he was, and so I was ushered into his office, sat down, and he welcomed me to Peru, and he asked me what I wanted to do. So I explained to him my interest in learning about the silver deposits and geology as much as I could. So to cut a long story short, we had a long chat, and then he invited me to lunch, which was a very, very pleasant affair. So after we came back from lunch, Don Alberto made a few phone calls, and he'd organised visits to not only his own deposits in the Julcani district and Uchucchacua, but to Cerro de Pasco, Morococha, also Toramocho, and some of the other porphyries in the south. So not only that, he provided me with a driver, and he said the driver will pick you up at 5 a.m. the next morning and take you to Julcani. So I was just completely amazed by this wonderful opportunity that had been provided for me. And so I was ready at 5, off we went. We made it to Julcani that evening. The next day was a Sunday, and it was a fiesta, and there was a very interesting bullfight, which is something that I'd never seen before, of course, and culturally very interesting. But anyway, the mine visits commenced on the Monday. Just a great learning experience, underground tours at both Herminia and Hermosa. And then after that, up to the Morococha area, Casapalca, across to Cerro de Pasco, which at the time was a train trip. That was very, very enjoyable as well. Uchucchacua, and then from there, he organised to drop me off at Tocopala. And so I just can never forget this experience. It was the kindness of this man, and his interest in young professionals was just a total inspiration for me. So I'd finished the silver districts, and now I was down in the southern Peru porphyry area. I'd visited Tocopala, and I was at Cajon. I still had a gap in my Chilean aspirations, and there I ran into a gentleman called Dave Boland. Dave was a senior consultant for Pimcock, Allen and Holt. He'd been working in Latin America for decades, and to cut a long story short, we became friends and teamed up together. He said, well, I'm going down to the mines doing a similar thing you are, come along with me. So not only did Dave bring the ability to get to the mines, but he was also totally fluent in Spanish. So once again, I'd fallen in the butter. So off Dave and I went. We got ourselves to Arica on the border, and then basically bust our way from Chuquicamata, El Salvador, and ended up in Disputada. That was a wonderful trip. We had a lot of fun. Dave was about 10 to 12 years older than I was, but we were basically kindred spirits in looking at rocks and just wanting to have fun with geology. one of the things that did stick in my mind, and it has forever, was the geology department at El Salvador, the organisation of the exploration team, the way that the alteration and mineralogy had been studied in detail, the rock collection, the slab collection was something that's I've always appreciated, and later in life made sure that all of my exploration camps had a similar setup. So that was great. Then,
can I just interrupt? Was that anything resulting from the work of Lou Gustafson
absolutely
and John
it was.
Hunt?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And sadly, we've just lost John
Yes,
Hunt.
I heard that yesterday with great sadness. Yeah, we've lost somebody there that was an absolute legend.
Very special.
Yeah, no, that was really special, and it taught me a lot in a short time. Most of my exploration teams have had the benefit of this ever since. All of my camps have a diamond saw. They have a slab library, and the geologists sitting around tables looking at these regularly. And there's nothing better than looking at a cut surface of a rock to get as much out of it as you can, and to preserve the library of your slabs so that you can refer to them at any time.
And if you have to, you've always got something you can make a thin section from.
Oh, definitely, yes. And that was another part of our exploration labs, was anything that got assayed or was sent for petrology, the other half was a sawn slab, preserved.
And when you were in the El Salvador area, did you get across to have a look at Potrerillos at all?
No, I didn't have the time, unfortunately. Yeah, Dave and I were, well, I was especially on quite a limited budget, and all I had was a backpack and a hammer.
But anyway, I interrupted you.
No problem at all.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I had 2 weeks to go, and this was the Brazil section. Once again, John Koenig had introduced or made introductions for me to their manager in Chile, who was a guy called Des Horscroft, if I remember rightly. And then the contacts in Brazil were Bob Lyle and Di James. Bob was the chief geologist at Montebello, and so I arrived in Rio. So I was picked up by Di James, and he kindly put me up his apartment for the night. The chief geologist for Montebello, Bob Lyle, happened to be there, so I got to meet Bob before I even went to Montebello. And then the next day he and I went up to Montebello. Of course, this is one of the classic famous mines of Brazil and orogenic gold deposits in the world. At that time, I think it was, I forget the exact depth, but it had been going since the colonial times. It was also the place where I believe refrigeration was invented for underground. That was a great visit, and my next stop was Jacobina, which was the Witwatersrand lookalike that Anglo were exploring, and I was there for 3 days, hosted by an Italian geologist whose name was Valerio Baldini, a very, very enthusiastic geologist, and it was a pleasure just to listen to him and his ideas on the deposit. He taught me a lot. Other places I went were the carbonatite at Araxá, the fluorite district in the south, Santa Catalina, and finally an absolutely fascinating trip to the manganese mines in Amapá State at Cerro do Navio. To get there was only by rail, and I was in a caboose on the end of a manganese ore train for practically the whole day to get up there, looking out the window at the Amazon. I had 2 or 3 wonderful days there, returned to Rio de Janeiro, and then back to work. It was just an incredible experience, and it's one that, if, of all the trips I've done, I think it was probably the most interesting and the most beneficial, and largely thanks to Don Alberto Benavides.
And meeting up with the Pincott
Dave Boland, yeah. Dave actually, we became close friends, and we had a lot to do with each other later in life.
And how many weeks in total?
It was 6 weeks.
Fantastic.
Yeah,